It's time for this week's episode of Brandon Sports Talk, featuring in-depth interviews from those who are trending in the world of athletics. And now, here's the host of Brandon Sports Talk, Brandon Pate.
Welcome back to Brandon Sports Talk. In today's episode, I had the privilege to interview the two business owners and sports podcasts of College Sports Attorney. How are you doing today?
We're doing good. Yeah, we're happy to be here today. Thanks for having us on your podcast. Absolutely.
No problem. Can you talk about how you got started with your Sports Talk podcast?
Yeah, so we're two lawyers. We practice in Portland, Oregon, and one of the areas of law that we practice in is college sports and compliance issues. So schools and athletes will contact us to help them with compliance issues. And we were talking about that there really isn't really a podcast out there that's doing what we're doing, where we're talking about when schools get dinged with compliance problems and how they react and what the penalties are. And so we decided, well, let's do it. And it's been a lot of fun. So we started doing it about a year ago, and we're having a blast.
Can you talk about how you came up with the idea of College Sports Attorney?
Yeah, as far as the name of our podcast?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I figured, Spencer and I were thinking, maybe we'll just keep it simple. We're simple guys. We're basic guys. What is this? We're two lawyers. We're two people, and we're talking sports. Let's keep it simple. There is different names. We could have came up with just a symbol as opposed to like a name. I mean, we could have done some cool stuff. We thought we're simple guys, easygoing guys. We're two lawyers talking sports. But sometimes we'll add talking college sports, sports law in general, because we're not contained to just college sports. We like to talk some NFL, some NBA, different stuff going on. We even life, and we sprinkle in a little politics or governing or that sort of thing here and there, a little bit of law, but our primary focus is college sports. And so at our heart, we're just two lawyers talking sports.
Who have you interviewed on the college level?
Yeah, so we've had a great opportunity. We've interviewed a number of different compliance officers from schools like Utah State, USC, Cal State Northridge. We just interviewed a guy from Western Carolina. Let's see, where else? Arizona State, Syracuse. So all over the nation, we've had a ton of compliance people, and then we've also had administrators at Bowling Green University, and we've also spoken to representatives from the Kansas City Chiefs in the NFL and the Seattle Seahawks, and then also the Milwaukee Bucks. So we kind of have a wide range of people that we've had on the podcast.
Can you talk about how you've made connections with, like how you said, Kansas City and Milwaukee?
Yeah, so, I know that compliance folks, and we've had compliance folks and sometimes administrators at the collegiate level, and we've also had director of ops for football and basketball as well at major programs. And sometimes they're a little hesitant because they're not used to being involved with the media. They might usually it's their coach that's going to say something, or they're going to just tell a sports information director at the school, and it's very sanitized. They're not used to sort of off the cuff giving an interview, only knowing the general basic questions and then doing it. And so they're a little bit untrusting sometimes with that. They're not used to it. And so you have to, I think, have that relationship where you've dealt with them in the past and they can trust you. They know that you're not going to try to trick them with a gotcha question or make them look bad or something like that. You're going to build them up. It's going to be positive and fair. And so, I have relationships with people that I've worked with at Oregon State and at USC that now have jobs in the NFL and the NBA and other schools. And I just have a history with these people that I've worked with for years and years. And so when I reach out to them and say, hey, we got the sports podcast, love to have you on, chat about this and that, oftentimes they'll say, yeah, great, sounds good. Let me know a couple of the basic questions. Oh, I just want to find out about your background and this and that. And that's how we get them on. And so we always have this slate
And we have some other people coming up from other, Pac-12 schools and different things where we can get them on. And it might be harder for other podcasts to get those people on, because I think generally they default to, I don't want to be involved in that.
Can you talk about, because I know from myself with my podcast, I've dealt with a lot of compliance officers. Can you talk about like the process of dealing with compliance officers in a more detailed manner?
Yeah, do you want to take that one? I mean,
Yeah. So my background is a compliance officer. I did 2 years at Oregon State and then about 6 years at USC. So I have about 8 years of athletic compliance experience, and I can understand them. So if I'm interviewing them in a podcast, I kind of understand their language a little bit and the things that are going to kind of push their buttons, or things that they're going to want to talk about, or like, hey, tell us about the unique challenges of having a compliance office in a small town. Because I know that's something. Or tell me about the unique challenges of recruits when dealing with in an urban center, because that's going to be unique as well. So because I've experienced a lot of that, and so I've talked to these folks, and so I know kind of what buttons to push where they're going to want to talk about that or have something to say about that. Where I stay away from certain topics that I know they're probably not going to want to talk about that. Well, tell us about the violations you've had, and they're not going to want to get into that, especially if they're in the middle of investigating it and that sort of thing, and people are listening. And so I think you have to have a sensitivity to what they're dealing with, understand what their job is really well. Because I think to be a good interviewer, you really got to know the person that you're interviewing or asking questions of. Otherwise, you're going to ask questions that maybe is outside of their expertise or not something they really want to talk about. And then you have to, so you just have to kind of play that dance a little bit. Now, not all compliance officers are radio personalities, right? I mean, some are going to be kind of stiff maybe and very businesslike. So you have to play that as well too. Like, is this somebody I need to kind of joke around with a little bit, get them open, get them talking about a few things that they're comfortable with? Or is this somebody that's already like that, and then I need to focus them a little bit on some of the rules and the nuts and bolts and that sort of thing? I also know that compliance officers, it's very fact specific on the situation. So they hate giving a specific answer to a general question. So oftentimes the answer is going to be, well, it depends. But it depends on this factor, this factor, and this factor. But let me give you a couple hypotheticals. That's going to be easier for them to answer than, well, would it be a violation if? Right. And so you want to be careful of that as you're interviewing them a little bit, of understanding how they think. And that would make sense on how they answer. So I think that's how we've kind of approached it.
Can you talk about the process with, I know me, I have to go through stuff, most of the time I have to go through compliance officers to get college coaches, but most of the time coaches will just be like, yeah, I'll come on,
Yeah.
Can you talk about that process of going through them?
Yeah, so you're saying, how do you get through them to get to the person you want to? The good news for me is I have relationships with almost every coach or every person that we've gotten on the podcast. We've gotten director of equipment, director of ops for football, director of ops for basketball, administrators. And how I've done that is I went just directly to them. They know that I know the rules, and I was a compliance officer for them when I worked with them. And so I haven't had to have a situation with, well, let me clear this with so-and-so, because I know I'm not going to put them in a spot that's going to cause them to violate any rules. Now, there's been times where I've had an ops person that I'm talking to, and they start talking about a plan or something that they're doing that they've already greenlit. Now, that wasn't necessarily our fault, because we didn't put them in that spot. You know what I mean? That's something that they were already doing, that they talked about maybe after the fact. It came out like, maybe that was not exactly, a permissible thing that they were doing. And so, but I guess we have close enough relationships where we don't have to get it okayed, if that makes sense, because they see me as already the compliance officer. And there's problems where Aaron's going to ask about recruits, or he's going to ask about this or that, or he's going to promote an athlete or put them in a jeopardized position. I'm not going to do that. And so not only the compliance officers have felt comfortable, but the staff members as well. And so I think that's just part of that relationship. And I'll know what questions I can and can't ask to get them in trouble where they'd have to worry about that. But for you, or for somebody maybe that hasn't done that, what I think the compliance officer is going to want to hear is you're not going to promote any athletes. It's not going to be a recruiting service in any way, and then it's not going to be something where the coach is going to endorse a high school, promote a product, or endorse a recruit. So just think, is this going to cause a recruiting problem for the coach, or am I using the student athlete's name, image, or likeness in any way? Because what can happen is, let's say you're interviewing a coach and you say, yeah, that football player is amazing, and I know he likes Rydell gloves, and or something to that effect. You're not going to do that, but they don't know. The compliance office doesn't know. They always want to educate you and make sure that you don't do anything with their student athletes or recruits, and so they want to have an opportunity to control the message and give you a little rules ad. So that's so as long as you can get tell compliance officer those things, not going to mess with your student athletes. The name, image, and likeness. I'm not going to have the coach talk about recruits at all specifically, just maybe recruiting in general. What's their philosophy, that sort of thing. I'm not going to ask them to talk about specific recruits, that sort of thing, things that they can't do. I'm not going to compromise them in any way. I think you're going to be able to get through that, and they're going to say, no problem. We'll get you right to the coach.
Can you speak about the name, image, and likeness, how you touched on?
Yeah, so name, image, and likeness is a huge hot button issue right now for the NCAA. There's been a big push by a number of different states, California, Ohio, Florida, and a couple of others, to have new laws put on the books that allow college athletes to make money off their name, image, and likeness, which is something that had previously been banned by the NCAA or seriously regulated. In fact, we've been contacted by former athlete or student athletes who got dinged because they had a YouTube channel or whatever. And so that is something that is in the works right now. The NCAA is working with colleges and with Congress to prepare new rules and laws to allow these student athletes to make money off their name, image, and likeness. We've had a couple of people on our podcast who talk about that specifically and the new rules that are coming up, but we don't know what those rules are going to be. We also don't know how we hypothesize that that's going to be a big problem and cause a lot of work for compliance offices. And that's because ultimately they're going to have the responsibility to educate. And so it's going to be this balancing act of allowing these student athletes to make money off their name, image, and likeness, which in theory is a great idea, but at the same time, how do they regulate it and who has to regulate it? So there are a lot of problems that come up with that, right?
Yeah, I have some skepticism about it. I mean, the first thing is everybody wants athletes to get paid. We don't want people that are bringing in money for the school and using their talents on TV to not get paid. I mean, I don't think anybody thinks that's good, but it's just a tip of an iceberg. And then when you see the under part of the iceberg under the water, you realize how difficult that actually is to monitor, because there's a lot of people that don't want to follow the rules, right? There's going to be maybe let's say some school out there, I don't want to mention any specific schools or companies, but let's say there's a booster out there that has a company and he thinks, gosh, this could be a great recruiting tool. I'm going to give kind of fake commercials to every kid that comes in, and I'm going to give them $50,000 each to be in this commercial. And hey, it's just an endorsement. It's not a big deal. It's fair. It's even. But really what he's using it for is kind of a recruiting inducement to get these recruits to come to the school, which is not the purpose of the rule. So you can have a good intended rule, and there's going to be people that find a way to use it for an unintended purpose. And that's the connect we got to figure out with compliance and the NCAA. And that's kind of the holdup that we got to figure out how to do this properly.
Can you talk about some of the segments and topics that you talk about on your podcast, The College Sports Attorney?
Yeah, so our podcast, so we have a number of different segments. We generally have an opening segment where we kind of talk about the news of the day or certain or interesting sports-related law issues. We talked about the Zion Williamson lawsuit, talk about other kind of lawsuits that are going on within, like a college sports or a professional sports situation. Then we like to have kind of a rules ed segment where we talk about a school that maybe reported an NCAA violation or was given an NCAA violation. We talk about what that violation was and where they screwed up and then the rules that they broke. Then we usually have an interview section, and then at the end we have AP Nostradamus here, who is 20-1 with his picks so far this year, and we choose 4 games, or I guess 19-1.
19-1.
We choose 4 games a week that I present to him, and then he picks those games, and he is 19-1 in the games, and that's not an exaggeration. So that's our last segment. That's where we like to have a little bit more fun. But the thing, Aaron and I have known each other for 15, almost 20 years now, and we went to law school together, and so we have long relationship. We've known each other for a long time. So we know how each other think and kind of joke around. And for me, that's been the most fun. But those are our 4 segments generally for each podcast.
Can you have you talked about the destroying case on your podcast before?
Which case was
Yeah,
that?
I don't know the destroying
The
case. I don't know that.
The YouTuber from UCF.
I don't know that. We don't know that case. We'll have to research that case a little bit better. I don't know it off the top of my head.
How do you find your interviewees?
Interviewees, the people that we're interviewing. So so basically, again, it kind of comes down to relationships. It's either somebody that reaches out to us that says they like our podcast, they're listening. We always usually invite that person if we have time. Hey, you want to be on our podcast? We'd love to chat with you, ask you some questions. Or we've reached out to a couple of different people, but it's people that we have relationships with. It's people that we know, people that we've worked with over the years, over the decade, or so. And so that's kind of how we find people. And we try to have a purpose for each person we have on the podcast. Maybe we're talking recruiting. So let's go get a recruiting person. Or we're going to be talking coaching. Let's go get a coach. Or we're going to be talking about the NFL. Let's see if we can get someone from the NFL. And it doesn't always work out that way. And there's been times where we've had to have someone cancel that we've had lined up, or somebody said they're going to be in the podcast, but then when we tried pressing them for a date, it's been hard to press them down. There's been a little bit of that for sure. But for the most part, I would say 80% of the time, 90% of the time, we've had luck. And even if it's just a day's notice, somebody will say, you know what, yeah, I'm free. Give me a call tomorrow. I'll get on your podcast, no problem. So yeah, that's kind of how it's worked. And we wanted a variety from women to men to younger people to older people that work in the NFL, NBA, college, administrators, compliance folks, coaches, ops folks, recruiting people, very diverse backgrounds. So we can have them kind of find out, even we've had radio personalities. We've had USC's radio personality that we've had other podcasters, sort of like you, that have reached out and been on our podcast. And we've had people that collect jerseys. And just different people that because it's fun for us to kind of have just a wide variety of people. Some are names, some are not names, and that's okay. We kind of approach it the same. We have friends of the show, meaning people that have been on multiple times. We don't have to really introduce them. We're just drilling in on like 1 or 2 questions. Oh, we're wondering about this. Let's talk to the guy at Syracuse. He knows about this. Hey, what about this? And then we get him off the phone, and that sort of thing. So we utilize our interviewees, not always as just an interview, but sometimes it's for a purpose. Sometimes it's more jokey. Sometimes it's more specific. We've had law firms. We have one of the top law firms in the land, actually in the United States, that handles college sports law issues for major programs. I mean, we're talking Oregon and LSU and major programs all around the country, all the majors. And we have one of their partners join us on our podcast when we really want to dig into some of the issues that are going on. So we have a purpose for these different people. And again, it's networking, it's reaching out, it's having relationships, it's staying positive, and then doing a good job. Because when they see it on the back end, and if it was spun negative, or if at the end of their interview, I said, that guy didn't really seem like he knew what he was talking about. That guy, I didn't like the way he answered this question, that question. They're going to think, gosh, I'm not going to be on that podcast anymore. And so you don't want to do that either. You want to spin it positive and have it be a good experience for everybody involved. And so that's kind of how we do it. And not every case, when you talked about that use of the YouTube, we've addressed, if it has to do with kind of using your name, image, and likeness through a company, we've addressed that sort of thing before on the show. We've talked, a good thing we normally do too is if there's a school that's had an issue, we've reached out to that school with our relationships. Bowling Green cut baseball. So we said, let's reach out to Bowling Green. I know somebody there. Let's see if he wants to be on our podcast. Boom, they got on our podcast. And so that's kind of how we've chosen our interviewees.
What are some of your future plans for your podcasts?
Well, we're just having fun. I mean, we just do it. We're having fun. We've been talking with, there's a local sports talk radio that we've been talking with. We'd love to partner with them. We hope to partner with them at some point in the future. But at this point, we're just having fun with it. And it's just kind of a way for us to get our name out there a little bit more and to grow our business of doing sports law and representing people who have issues and schools who have issues regarding sports law.
What advice would you give upcoming and future sports talk podcasts?
People that want to get started. So one, it's not that expensive to get started. I mean, you can order a basic kit. I mean, if you have a computer, you got a couple mics, you can get started on a podcast on an extreme budget. It doesn't take, but I think what separates the ones that succeed from the ones that just sort of muddle around, one, you have to have dynamic guests. I think they don't have to always be stars or names, but you have to have guests that people might find interesting, where they want to listen to that person. What does that person have to say? And I think that you have to talk about a lot of different things. And in today's society, we're inundated with messages and media and social media and news, and it's just coming at you like this. So we're used to getting tons of information. And if you have a podcast that zooms in on one small little issue, it might bore people where they think, well, I'm not into that one specific issue, I'm going to tune out. But if you have a way to kind of, I think, like have little pinpoints of other things that you talk about in addition to your main podcast, I think that's going to intrigue the listener that maybe isn't specifically interested in the topic you're talking about. And so I think you have to be a little bit broader, entertaining, and yeah, just is it something that somebody's going to want to tune into? Because there's so many things to tune into in today's life. What sets you apart where somebody would think, I'm going to listen to that? And so what do you think, Spence?
Yeah, absolutely. Interesting topics. Make sure that you're well versed in what you're talking about. Interesting interviewees, and then above all else, the podcasts that I listen to, other than ours, are podcasts that are interesting, right? That are gripping and that are well done and that are fun to listen to. And so I would just say, try to make your podcast as fun as possible, as informative as possible, and try to find a niche or a niche, depending on what part of the country you're from. And just find something that's interesting. I mean, we're focusing on compliance. And so we have compliance offices who listen to us every week. A whole office listens to us because we're informing and we're instructing. And so, find some type of a niche that would be interesting for people to listen to.
Yeah, and I think the last thing I'll add, sorry about that, just, have a take. We've talked about that. Have some sort of take. Sometimes people on podcasts will say, they'll give you the issue. Like, it could be this, it could be that, who knows? And they move on, but have a take. I think people want to hear, like you say, hey, name, image, and likeness. So here's what's coming down. Here's what people are saying. I think it's going to have a problem, and here's why. And even if other people fully disagree, I think that's still gripping. The news does that a lot, where they'll have a take, and whether you agree with it strongly or disagree with it strongly, it's going to get you engaged. But if you're kind of wishy-washy, never really have any information, you're not really having a take, and then people might get bored of that. So that's kind of one little wrinkle I might have too.
That's great advice. Where can my listeners find your podcast at on social media?
So there's a couple of ways. You can go to Apple Podcast, and you look it up. We're two lawyers talk college sports. That's the podcast. So we're on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Google Podcast, Overcast, and just about any podcast channel that you use, you can find us. So look us up, Two Lawyers Talk College Sports, and we'll put a link below this video when it's done for our Apple Podcast. But yeah, we love it. We love interacting with our listeners and with people who ask us questions, and we're happy to chat with anybody at any time.
Thank you again for this interview, and best of luck in your future as sports attorneys.
Thanks.
You can find Brandon Sports Talk on Facebook at Brandon Sports Talk, Instagram at Brandon Sports Talk, Twitter at @talk_Brandon, and you can find me on YouTube at Brandon Sports Talk. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you again for your interview, and best of luck.
Thanks for having us.
You've been watching Brandon Sports Talk. Please feel free to like, share, and subscribe to Brandon Sports Talk on social media and on YouTube.